while we're waiting, I think people are just starting to arrive. I want to slowly get started. Again, we're very pleased to have for this session Rene, who is the CEO of BCI Global. So, just to keep it simple in terms of bio, Rene has founded the company, over 30 years ago, 32 years ago, Rene?
35.
35 years ago. So, Rene has a lot of experience in procurement and sourcing for all those years, over 3 decades, covering Europe, but also Asia Pacific region, with BCI having operations also in Asia, with an office in Singapore as well. So Rene, it's all yours. Go ahead. Welcome.
Max, thank you very much for your introduction. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to be here today with you to talk about decentralization of manufacturing. We had today in this session already a lot of discussion about sourcing products and where do you get them from China or other Southeast Asian countries, but now we are pretty much talking about the manufacturing side of the business. So what I want to do is talk about an agenda which primarily focuses on a couple of topics to start with. Here we go. An introduction of BCI Global, I will keep that obviously very short. Then why is there an urgency for companies to review their supply chain? Then look into decentralization of manufacturing, because you have the sourcing side of the business, getting products from whatever country in Asia, and we have more the manufacturing side. And I will talk about manufacturing, and I will do that primarily also with a case study where we make the comparison between a company having a production facility in Shenzhen in comparison with having a production plant in Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam, and then see what the conclusions are from that. As mentioned by Max, the company started on the day that I graduated in 1985. We are now working around the globe with offices in Singapore, Shanghai, the US and Atlanta, but also in Silicon Valley and LA and in Europe, working on 3 topics mainly: manufacturing footprint, location advice, and supply chain. It's a global boutique, and to be honest, we were pleased that earlier this year, Forbes magazine mentioned BCI Global once again up second year in a row as one of the best management consulting firms. And the story I'm going to tell comes from various types of industries and comes from clients. You see here some sample of clients we work for in various industry verticals, where we help them with manufacturing strategies, supply chain strategies, location advice. That could be in Asia, in China, or in Southeast Asia, or in India. But it's also possible that we work for German companies setting up a manufacturing plant in Mexico, and American companies looking to set up something in Thailand or Malaysia. So we work around the globe with independent advice. And that's also the background, what I want to share with you today. Now, if you talk...
Rene, Rene, sorry to interrupt you. We have some sound issues on your side. Your sound is kind of cracking up. It's not very clear. I'm not sure whether it would be better for you to actually use a headset or microphone. But from my side also, I just checked with LV. It's also not very clear from our side. So maybe I think it's a connection issue. Maybe your connection is a bit low. But if you have a headset, I think it would be better if you can. If not, we go ahead.
Do you hear me now better?
I think it's better now, yes. Let's try, yeah. Okay, thanks.
Okay. Apologies for that. If you look to the reasons why companies are reviewing their supply chain, there are 4 types of reasons, and you see them here on the screen. You have internal drivers, think about growth of companies or a new product or in the pipeline. You have industry drivers, think about Internet of Things, Industry 4.0, new smart manufacturing technologies. But you have also, a little bit on the bottom side, more external drivers. Why companies are reconsidering their supply chain? Could be external drivers in terms of trade disputes and trade tariffs suddenly coming up, and you have to respond to that. And you have environmental drivers. Think about, let's say, natural disasters, and obviously COVID-19 is one. In my experience over the last decades, it's the external drivers which are these days more important, which urge companies to take a closer look at what you should do. So this combination of drivers ask for companies to take a closer look at the footprint, at how can you build resilience in your manufacturing footprint and your supply chain. And there are three different elements in that. If you want to add resilience in your global value chain, you look for an organizational point of view. A lot of companies have discovered that business continuity planning was something, let's say, which was neglected or not organized very well. We see companies investing and looking into technology and infrastructure. Think about control towers. How do we really gain end-to-end visibility? And obviously, companies are looking to restore and to enhance resilience on their footprint, because a lot of companies came from the situation that they had all their production eggs in one Chinese basket, and with the coronavirus, everybody found out that that is a very vulnerable situation, because if something happens, if the supply chain is distorted, you immediately see that something has to be done. So building resilience is for many supply chain and operations VP these days a very important issue. That comes together with the question about the manufacturing competitiveness of China. If you look to what China has to offer for companies around the world, then still, if you look on the production cost, the large market itself, the increased productivity, China has still a lot to offer. And certainly also on the right-hand side of the slide, you see that integrated supply base. There is nearly nowhere in the world where you, for example, in the Shenzhen area, have such a concentrated electronics cluster. But on the other hand, there are also drivers which make it more difficult. Think about the regulatory environment, about IP protection, think about the political environment, and about the trade disputes, for example, between China and the US, which has forced companies already the last couple of years to look into, hey, should we not invest in Southeast Asia and not concentrate only in China? So you could say COVID-19 has accelerated that process. It's not for many companies something completely new, but COVID-19 has made that now on the top of the agenda. And that goes with, on the right-hand side, the emerging alternatives. We see low-cost countries in Malaysia and Thailand and the Philippines and India, which are also coming up now as an interesting alternative. So the manufacturing competitiveness of China is under pressure. It doesn't mean it's bad. It doesn't mean that it's not a huge market, because it still is, but it's something you have to look for. So many companies see that there are various manufacturing challenges they have to face. Rising labor costs, particularly on the East Coast, obviously. I mentioned already trade disputes and IP hurdles. So the rising labor costs and the political pressure made that companies are looking to other parts of Asia as well. So what about that decentralization? You could say, okay, if it's clear that there are sourcing risks by being too dependent on China, that new technologies help us elaborate, enhance the setup of smaller manufacturing plants around the world. And if there are such external disruption risks like pandemics and trade barrier risks, and the teasing of governments in Southeast Asia, in the US and Europe to attract companies to their geographies, if that's so clear, then you could say, well, everybody has to decentralize. Why would you be so dependent and vulnerable by having too much production capacity in China? But decentralization is often easier said than done. Do you have, and if you go to various options and consider various options in Southeast Asia, do you still have the same labor cost level? Is that supplier base there still available? That's an important issue because for many companies it's our assembling operation. So looking into the supplier base is for many companies a major driver if they are considering and assessing other alternatives in Asia. The cost should still be very interesting. And let's not forget, it's also about markets. And even if you look what's happening today, then you still see that the Chinese market is still growing very fast. So decentralization has its pros and cons. So you can say, I stay only in China, economies of scale advantage, a nearby sourcing ecosystem, that's all great. But the high value chain disruption risk, the increasing labor cost, the long distance time to market, those are the disadvantages. The China plus one strategy, so having a manufacturing plant in China, but also in Southeast Asia, and some companies have already the China plus 1, 2, 3 strategy, is you reduce risk. You are still often far away from US and European markets, so that vulnerability is not completely skipped. But a lot of companies are following that path and are looking at the C-level, hey, should we stay in China only? Should we set up additional manufacturing plants in Southeast Asia? Or should we look into reshoring? That's why a lot of American and European companies are bringing production capacity back from Asia to the major home markets. But that obviously goes with an additional cost, but has the advantage that you are close in the market itself. If you look into how does that work out on a corporate level, and I want to share with you a business case based on our real life experiences working with so many companies. And again, it's illustrative. Your individual corporate business case is always different, but it gives you a glimpse of the thinking process, what we see at the C-level within the client companies we work for. So suppose we have an American company producing printed circuit boards in China these days, has seen those risks which I touched upon before, and a company is looking, should we relocate or partly relocate our production capacity out of Shenzhen? And in this case, we obviously make comparisons with all locations around the world, but in this case, we look into the comparison between Shenzhen and Ho Chi Minh City. So this facility has 250 people, and the question is, they have their 4 production lines. So I show you the results of various scenarios. One is 4 assembly lines still in China. Scenario where you relocate, reshore, bring back all the 4 production lines, you transfer them to Vietnam. You could do 2, so keep 2 in China and 2 in Shenzhen, and a last scenario. The last scenario I will not touch upon. So you have various scenarios to various decentralization scenarios to mitigate the risk we touched upon before. That's obviously very depending on the profile of the facility. So from a sourcing perspective, you still see here on the top left-hand side, China very important. If you see on the right-hand side, if you relocate to Vietnam, you probably will have more out of ASEAN countries sourcing products as well. If you look on the distribution side, it's the same. So we assume here, and it can be dependent in your case, but we assume here that this company is distributing from the plant, wherever the plant is, in China or Vietnam or wherever, 50% to the US, 30% to the European Union, and then the remainder stays in Asia. And that profile, you see that on the left side and the right-hand side, that's the same. So that profile is very important. Let me walk you through these 5 steps. We first make a comparison of the operating costs, labor costs, real estate costs, transportation costs. Then we look into the quality of the business environment, lockdown costs, because if you have a lockdown like we had earlier this year, that's costing an enormous amount of money. Then how can you meet customer expectations? And I also look into the trade duties impact, particularly because in the profile I mentioned in my previous slide, 50% of the products are still going to the US. And as you know, there's a China-US trade dispute where, particularly for PCBs, there is a 25% import duty. Operating costs, you compare labor costs, various titles, you calculate that for 5 years, you look into real estate costs and transportation costs. That's the reason why that distribution profile is so important. And we have lots of data and comparative databases available to make that comparison. Here you see that comparison. On the left-hand side, you see the current situation. So on an index, it's 100, and you see here the buildup of labor costs, real estate costs, and transportation costs. This is the company having 4 production lines in China. Then we have the case full reshoring, so where you have 4, all 4 production lines are now put into Vietnam. So what is then the cost differential? You can see it's 10%. And half reshoring means you keep 2 production lines in China, 2 production lines in Vietnam, and you see that's still, if you take the cost figures, more or less the same. That's on an OPEX point of view. Now, the quality of the business environment is also important. So companies are looking into, hey, what factors are important to run a smooth operation? And here you can see, based on a weighted index, which every company makes for itself, you look into labor availability, accessibility, ease of doing business, risk. You discuss what is important for our company. We have good solid data, international comparative data available to make those comparisons. And so, as it is not to be expressed in currencies like the cost, you express them in a weighted index in a score between 1 and 5. 1 is poor for this project, 5 is excellent. So with those weightings for your specific case, you get, for whatever locations you compare, an overall assessment of the quality score. And here you can see that that specific weighted quality score in Shenzhen is 3.4, primarily because the ecosystem is there so strong, the labor availability is better there. So if you compare those various factors on the quality of the business environment, you can see that there is an advantage of Shenzhen over Ho Chi Minh City. Now we go to the third factor. The third factor is lockdown costs. Now, we know this year we learned, and we had in the past tsunamis and earthquakes, so we know that lockdown costs are high. But based on our experience, and our experience are based on the clients we work for, we calculate now in the comparisons that there is a lockdown of 2 months every 5 years. And that add cost, if you make a calculation for the next 5 years and you assume, and in this case we assume that it would take place in China, you assume that there is a lockdown of 2 months every 5 years, you have to add, in this case, for this specific project, $11 million to the equation. Then we are going to meeting customer expectations. Customer expectations are important as well, because you want to see that wherever you locate, clients feel comfortable. And that can be the distance to major customer markets, but also from a political and geopolitical and natural disaster risk, clients want to be comfortable. So here again, we look for each and every project to the specific rating, and you look into what is now the total customer expectation analysis, also in comparison between various cities. And here you see that. And here you see that Shenzhen and Ho Chi Minh City are more or less the same. And they are, let's put it this way, if you take political, if you take the risk factors into account, if you look to the other factors which play an important role here, like distance to customer market, in our case, 80% is outside Asia, then China and Southeast Asia don't make such a huge distance. So that's the reason why you see here that both cities score the same on meeting customer expectations. Last factor, trade impact. Trade impacts are important because in this case, and again, it depends on the case you make. For medical products, it's different for intermediate chemicals, it's different for sub-assemblies or for automotive parts, so you have to look into what it means. But in this case, we have that trade tariff between US and China, and the US was 50% of the destination of the products produced. So you have to add that to the equation. And it's our firm belief, even with the new Biden administration in the US, that those trade tariffs will not go away if the new president takes office in January. So we expect that the trade war, the discussion between the US and Europe, and on the other hand, China, will last for a number of years. So not something like that will go away in a couple of months. You don't know, but we calculate with it, and our clients want us to calculate with it. So from a cost point of view, you can see here in dark blue you have labor, then light blue is real estate, red is transportation, pink is lockdown cost, which is in this case only in the as-is case where you have complete production in China, and then you have those duties. So from a cost perspective, there's really a difference here to make. Now, what is now the overall equation? Here we compare full production, 4 production lines in Shenzhen with 4 production lines in Vietnam. From an operating point of view, Vietnam is $8 million cheaper on a 5 years basis. That has to do with the lower labor costs. You know that I mentioned that before. Then we add the lockdown cost to it, so then the gap is now $18 million. And if we add the lockdown cost, then the gap can be on a 5 year basis $71 million. And we know, you can see that on the upper right-hand side, that the scores on quality of business environment, Shenzhen is better, and on meeting customer expectations, Shenzhen and Ho Chi Minh City are more or less the same. So from a cost point of view, there is a substantial business case to really look into Vietnam. And again, it depends on the case and the products and the sourcing and distribution profile, but it really makes sense for many companies to take a closer look at that. And you can imagine that if you keep 2 production lines for the PCBs in China and you add 2 production lines in Vietnam, that the gap is a little bit smaller because you have still the combination of 2 facilities, which brings additional cost with it as well. So that's the reason why on a 5-year basis, it's the gap is now $55 million US. So what is here the message? The message is that it's really worthwhile to consider case by case, plant by plant, company by company, whether it makes sense to relocate decentralized production. And again, we took here Ho Chi Minh City as an example. You can there's also do with KL or with Manila or with cities in India. There are various opportunities, and that's what we do on a day-to-day basis. But it shows you that the combination of cost, lockdown cost, quality of the business environment, trade duties, and meeting customer expectations can really make an interesting equation. And you see already that companies are spreading out over Europe and spreading out over Asia. And some of the countries have some more specializations based on their regional clustering or based on history or based on the arrival of companies coming from all over the place to see, hey, there is more in Asia than only China itself. And that brings me to the last slide with a couple of conclusions. So it's clear that these external reasons, whether they are the more trade tariffs, geopolitical considerations, or whether it's more the natural disaster risk, that those 2 factors are playing an important role these days for companies to say, well, we should look, is the current footprint we have in China and Asia, and again, different for every company, is that still the most optimal one for the future? Is that future-proof? That will also mean that you have to look for each and every company. There is no one size fits all. So you have to look what is really for our company with our structure of various plants in Asia, the best solution. If you look into optimization of manufacturing footprint, it's not only about cost, right? We included already what does it mean for customers, what does it mean for conditions, think about risk. What are the differences in quality of the business environment? So cost is very important, imperative for nearly all companies in the world. But there is more than that to really make a fair and a well-based comparison between countries to make an important decision for your company. And if you have to make a location decision, you have to look into the comparison of various locations into all relevant cost factors. You know, everything you can express in currencies, in dollars or renminbi or whatever currency you want. So labor costs, real estate costs, transportation costs, you can deduct from that. Incentives you sometimes get in Southeast Asian countries. You have to look into all relevant quality of the business environment factors. Think about labor availability and skills, ease of doing business, but think also about international accessibility and the quality and the depthness of that supplier system, and you have to take all relevant risk factors in that equation into account as well. Geopolitical, financial, economic, etc. And with that, next I turn back to you to see whether some questions have come up during the session.
Thank you very much, Rene. Okay, so we have some questions coming up already, and I want to remind people that you can ask questions again at any time using the Q&A button at the bottom. So go ahead. If you have a question for Rene, you can press the button and ask a question now. Before I get into those questions, I would like to ask you, Rene, what is the cost of relocating or reshoring in a country like Vietnam? Is this something that you also take into consideration, cost, but also the time that, that is required to actually move a manufacturing facility to that country?
Yeah, definitely. Let's say we made here is the simple comparison on OPEX, on if you run operations, you have to look into investments, which we took into account, but you have also one-time costs. And one-time costs are doing all the effort. It can also be management time. So you have to look into those costs as well. But in a period of 10 years, you cannot put all the one-time costs only on year one. So you have to make that effort, relocating, but even if it's not relocating, but adding production plants in other parts of Asia, it always means that you have to make one-time cost. So in the complete comparison we make for our clients, those costs are included as well.
Okay. You mentioned that you're looking also into other countries. Have you done a similar analysis in countries like India, or I'm thinking here maybe Indonesia, or even countries like Turkey as well, who had attracted quite a bit of investment? Is this comparable with other countries? Yeah.
We do it. We wanted to have for this conference show a high-level business case, just to give everybody a feeling of what kind of consideration should you take into account. Our 75 consultants all over the world are working on a day-to-day basis how to optimize the manufacturing and supply chain of people and what kind of locations. Our teams in Singapore and Shanghai work every day on companies with these kind of questions. Should we set up a new operation in Southeast Asia? But for example, we were just 2 weeks ago discussing with a client where we did a study to relocate, to add new production capacity in China. They wanted us to look also to Southeast Asia, and are also now saying, hey, but should we not split the plant? And because for them, Europe is important, having some of these products in low-cost countries in Europe, which could be in Romania or in Poland, could even be Turkey. So making those kind of comparisons really what we do on a day-to-day basis. So help companies to make well-based business decisions.
And if you had to choose another country beyond Vietnam in Southeast Asia, what will it be? Which country do you think has most potential when it comes to manufacturing after Vietnam? Because a lot of people are talking about Indonesia, for example. Is Indonesia a top country for you?
To be honest, it's a logical question. And if the answer would be simple, we would not exist. Because you have to look for each type of industry. If you make automotive parts, or if you are in the apparel business, if you assemble medical instruments, or if you are in the electronics industry, it really depends on what you're looking for. So each and every country has its advantages and disadvantages, and that is what you have case by case to look at. Now, Indonesia, for example, is cost effective, but it's also from a distribution and infrastructure point of view, with all these aisles, not very easy. You see in some countries that the labor costs are increasing very fast. So what you have to do in our comparisons, we look to the situation now, the photo of today, but we also look into how will that develop in the next 5 years, and then look into what is really the equation. So
okay.
You see companies spreading all over the world because they have different requirements, and that's the reason that not everybody concentrates in one location.
Okay, we have a question from Sonia, who's asking, how are you predicting the RCEP to change the sourcing landscape?
I think the RCEP is clearly making doing business within Asia, but certainly also, let's say, with China easier. For a lot of companies, if you ask for companies for example, in China, if you talk with American companies or Japanese companies or European companies, there are still a lot of regulatory hurdles. So I expect that RCEP will make it easier to do business and to source. And Asia has always been, we talk about Asia, whether it's one country, but we know that all tax systems and bringing products from one country to the other are different. So my idea would be, my judgment is RCEP will help to make business easier and to source easier in various Asian countries. I have to say also that sometimes if you read the international trade press, it looks like that it's paradise on earth, and that's not what I expect. So I still expect that all these countries have the different tax system, the different regulatory environment, the different ease of doing business, very easy to very difficult. So RCEP will help to accelerate, to bring those barriers down. But it's not like, hey, as of when our CEP is full in place, that we can easy do business and that all our headaches evaporate. That's not the case.
Another question from another attendee saying, China just started to invest hugely in building super factories and to move to M2C model. Do you see it as a potential game changer for traditional sourcing pattern?
Basically what I see is that in general that China is trying to increase its manufacturing competitiveness, if I can focus my answer on that. And in its manufacturing competitiveness, it has to do with automation and robotization. You know, the most robots in the world are sold and installed in China. It's also by looking into different locations in China. So we see inland locations in China to the central part and to southwest. So if you take Chengdu, the capital of the province of Sichuan, you see that those locations are 30-40% more cost effective than Shanghai, for example, or Suzhou, and that companies are looking into that. So companies who still want to be in China are looking to other ways to still be cost competitive in comparison with Southeast Asian counterparts.
Another question from Neil, who's asking, what about the cost of senior management? That is, when you move to Vietnam, you need competent senior managers to manage the new operation and the transfer of supervisory and operation knowledge. So what do you think about this?
Oh, I think that's Neil, that's a good question. I think if you talk about upper management, that's an international world. So don't expect that if you have a manufacturing plant in China or in Vietnam or Malaysia, that your top managers, that there will be huge differences of what the top managers are, what they get as their salary. It's on the blue collar side, to use that word, where you make the difference, because in a manufacturing plant you have 3-4 people, quality leader, supply chain leader, overall managing director. But if you have 250 people on, say, half unskilled and the other semi-skilled, then that's where the difference in costs are being made. So you will not see huge differences in the total cost you pay for managers. It's on the blue collar side where the labor cost differences really makes sense.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Rene, again for sharing your insight. Lots of great experience from your, your long experience, doing this over the years. Again, I want to thank you also the attendees for all those questions. We have another speaker who's actually already speaking on another session. So I want to thank you all, and I will see you again next time. Thanks again, Rene.
Okay, thank you, Max.